Morning, everybody. If you have Bibles this morning, we're going to be in Luke chapter 14. I'd like to apologize for anything that I say that sounds funny. I kind of rewrote this whole thing this morning, so we'll see how it goes. But my handwriting is not the best. But starting off in Luke chapter 14, we're going to be starting off in verse 16, reading this parable that Jesus spoke. Starting off in verse 16, it says, Then he said unto him, A certain man made a great supper, and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs to go and see it. I pray thee have me excused. The other said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. And then the other said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. I would like to break this apart and maybe see it from 2 different points of views. I would like to look at it from the servant's point of view and those who are making the excuses. And the servant here, I know this can be applied in a lot of different ways, and I'm probably going to apply it to the way that doesn't make any sense, but the servant here is saved, is how I'm going to look at it. So we that are saved are like the servant, and we're going into this world for the Lord to try to bring more to the dinner, more to be saved. And those who are making excuses are the lost of this world. And they're making excuses of why they can't come into the Lord and why they cannot be saved. And us as saved, born-again servants make excuses too. I know I do. And I often forget that the Lord will qualify us for the job. So turning to Exodus chapter 4, we're going to be looking at Moses, who I find as a good example, someone that I can relate to his anger. But looking at Moses in chapter 4 and verse 10, and Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore, nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And the Lord said unto him, Who hath made man's mouth? Or who maketh the dumb or deaf, or the seeing or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with thy mouth, and teach thee what thou shalt say. I'm like Moses. I will sit there and I will make my excuse. Lord, I cannot speak. Lord, I just don't know if I'm the best qualified for this. Lord, I'm 16 years old. Why am I the one who's up here? But we know the Lord will give us what we need to do his will. I feel like oftentimes, us as his servant, I know I do this. I will go up, and if it's time for me to witness someone, the Lord's giving me a burden to do it, or giving me the opportunity to do it, I sometimes just kind of go up to them, and I'll almost do it in a half-hearted sort of way. I kind of go up to them and just, so you know the Lord? Not really digging into it. And I heard a long time ago a little story about a salesman and how he would go door to door and try to, I don't know what he was selling, trying to sell something to everybody. And he went back to his boss and he's like, I just didn't really sell that many today. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That's when his employer looked at him and says, your job isn't to make them drink. Your job is to make them thirsty. We shouldn't go up to this lost and dying world and just show them the Bible and be like, oh, yeah, y'all should read this. We need to go into it. We need to show them what the Lord has done for them. We need to show them what the Lord is offering, the salvation, what he did on the cross for us. We need to show them in our lives to be a good testimony. When people see us, they need to think, wow, what does he have? What does he have that I don't have? And we need to be ready to invite them into the Lord's house. We shouldn't sit there and judge them or make excuses on why they can't come. Oh, about 2 years ago, they were very rude to me. They did things to me that I just can't talk about today. I don't think that I should go witness to them. That's what sets us apart. That we are able to forgive in this world full of sin. But that's from a servant's point of view. Now you can look at it, though, from a lost point of view. Those people that are making excuses back in Luke chapter 14, and how some of them seem a little far-fetched, don't they? I have a wife. Poor guy. When I was lost, I made excuses. I know I did. I remember sitting there and looking up and just, I don't need to be saved yet. I'm too young. I'll be saved when I'm older. Whenever that way I can kind of enjoy life. Or maybe you're saying, I'm too far gone. I can't be saved because I've lived my life full of sin and the Lord can't save me anymore. Maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, I don't deserve it. If you're making those excuses today, please turn with me to Acts chapter 9. And I'd like to say it's true, you don't deserve it. I didn't deserve it. I deserve to go into rotten hell. The Lord still chose to show mercy on my soul today. We overlook that. We overlook like what the Lord's done for us. I sit there and people will talk to me a little bit about, they're like, oh, so you're saved? I'm like, yeah, I'm saved. We should be on fire about that. When somebody looks at us and we have an opportunity to tell them our testimony, we should tell it at the drop of a hat. We should be passionate about it. Hey, guess what? The Lord saved me. Praise the Lord. But if you look in Acts chapter 9, this is the calling of Saul. I'm going to read these first couple of verses here, and it says, And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciple of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and he desired of him letters to Damascus, to the synagogues, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. You know what Saul's wanting to do here? He's wanting to go and find Christians so he can kill them. He's going out, and I'm going to say it like this, he's doing the devil's work. This man was feared by Christians. He would go out and he would get them, tie them up, and bring them back so that way they might be killed. Going back in verse 3, it says, And he journeyed, and he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shone round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth and heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? He just answered his own question. And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. Going into verse 9 here, or going into verse 10, it says, And there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias, and he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the street, which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus. For behold, he prayeth, and he hath seeing in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hands on him that he might receive his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to the saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath the authority from the chief priests to bind all that call upon thy name. Ananias is scared even to go to him. That's how much evil is in this man's heart, or was in this man's heart. It says in verse 15, but the Lord said to him, go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went out his way and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him, said, Brother Saul, the Lord, even Jesus, hath appeared unto thee in the way as thou camest, hath he sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight, and be filled with the Holy Ghost. The Lord saved him. If you think that you're too awful to be saved, I don't know, I might not know you that personally, but I don't think you went out and slaughtered thousands of Christians. The Lord can save you today. You're not too far gone. And even though we don't deserve salvation, he still gives it to us freely if we just trust in him. And looking here, we also can see an example of what we should be like when we're saved. Look at Ananias, how willing he was to be able to go. I don't know if I could do that. I pray today that this is your wake-up call. If you're lost here today, please stop making your excuses. Stop whatever's holding you back. Just let go of it and submit. And if you're saved here today, I pray that you take this as an encouragement to continue to serve him more diligently, and pray that you might do more for him. That's all I have this morning. Dad, if you'll come, kids are dismissed to Sunday school.
It's good to see everybody this morning. It's good to be here today. We got just about everybody back, right? If you would, please be turning to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8. 1 Samuel chapter 8. This particular study going through here has been on my mind for some time, and we'll see how far we go with it. God had put this on my heart a few weeks ago, and praying this week and studying, I couldn't get away from it. So we're going to try to do it the best we can, take it verse by verse. But 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1, it says, And it came to pass when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel and to Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us, like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel, when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, and all they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Lord willing, we're going to study this out. We probably won't get through all this next week, but God chose this people, and God was to rule over them. It was never God's intent for Israel to have a king. God wanted them to look to him for guidance, not for man. And we look at the things going on in the world, and it's easy to get discouraged. I've tried to bury my head in the sand. But we're not to look to man for our deliverance. We're making the same mistakes that Israel made if we're looking to man to judge us, to help us, and to do things for us. Now, don't get me wrong. Other man can make things awful hard on us. But the one we look to is our Creator and our Savior. We look to God. So we see Samuel here is old. And his light's still shining, maybe just not as bright, but there's still things for him to do. And we're going to look through this. We probably won't get but a few verses in this morning. So let's look at verse 1. It says, "And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel." We see the cycle of life in verse 1. A man who, no matter how good he was for God's service, is still a man. Though man has tried to lift himself up above that, though he can say, God, I've done these things for you, at the end of the day, he's still creation. He's not creator. He is not equal with his God. Samuel was a great man. Maybe so great we'd never known a man like Samuel. But he was a man. And death comes to all men. This was a man, through what we read, who had desired to see his children take over in his place in this family business, so to speak, in the Lord's work. Two things are happening here. This man is growing old, and because of that, and whether or not it's true or not, maybe he feels this way. I'm not sure. But others are looking on, and it's almost like he's growing unfit for service, correct? Now, we've all read through this chapter. We know he goes to Saul. We know he goes to David later. He still had life ahead of him. But growing older doesn't make us unfit. Our hearts make us unfit. Age does not. Samuel, it would seem, the other people are looking on. They think he's getting too old for this particular service. Samuel had spent his life, his youth, his energy in public service for God, to God's people. Samuel had made the most of his years, and God wasn't done with him yet. Matthew Henry wrote this. I was studying this the other day, and this jumped out to me. Those that are in the prime of their life ought to be busy in doing the work of life. For as they go into years, they will find themselves less disposed to it and less able for it. So what did he say? Make your time count here. Your days are short. Your life is like a vapor. You can go to anyone in here, and if they've lived very long at all, they're going to say, just yesterday, I was your age. Just yesterday, I was where Matt and Allie are with a young child. And just like that, it's like I went to sleep and woke up, and now my son's driving. I shouldn't have let him get that old. But it goes by quick. He's saying you get one chance to do it, make it count. You got to be busy while you're young, while you have youth. Do young, youthful things that require youth and energy to do that job. Because as you get older, things are going to change. We only have a small time here on this earth, okay? Verse 2 and 3, let's read it. It says, "Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment." You know, it's a shame that this happens in God's work. It's a shame that God's people do this. It's a shame that it happens in God's churches. But it's even more of a shame to me as I read this. It happens to God's name. How many people are trying to make a living this day and time on the name of God? And I'm going to get real mean here for a minute. I'm not just talking Joel Osteen's. I'm talking there's a whole lot of churches out there who ain't doing nothing. They're making a mockery of God's name in doing so. That's a shame. We see here even the children of a good man fail. They fall aside. Just because there's a good man, just because Brother Roger's a good man doesn't mean his children are going to be like him. Okay? It doesn't, that grace is not handed down. We can say that. It's not transferable. Our children can turn aside if not kept by God's hand, by his hedge of protection. We know that. I'll say a long time ago, probably about 10 years ago, I had a family member pass away. And the day before the funeral, I went to the graveyard. I hadn't been there in a while and was looking at the stones and just kind of thinking on memories. And on the way out, I went by a house, and I knew the man that had lived there my entire life. He's probably 50 years older than me. I used to get off the school bus at his house when I was a kid. And I'd call him a good man. And we were talking, and I was sitting there in the living room, and he got me a cup of coffee, and his wife's in there. And I was enjoying the time I was able to spend with him. And he said, "How's your family?" I mean, we're close, right? He had pictures of me on his wall, and it's been years since I talked to him. And I was like, "They're good. They're healthy." And we got to talking a little further, and I said, "I'm just afraid that my children will make my mistakes, or, they'll grow up and be like me." And he looked me in the eye, and I'll never forget it, because the conversation got serious. And he said, "I want to give you some advice." And he said, "You take it for what you want." He said, "You need to pray for your kids." And he said, "You do the best you can for them." He said, "You do the best you can in raising them. But you just got to have faith in God." He said, "Quit thinking it's about you and have faith that God's going to take care of them." And that's great advice. I'd argue to any parent out there, that's about the best advice you can get. Do the best you can, have faith. Raise them in a godly way. Now, there's a lot of different interpretations you can apply to that. But really, for those who would want to argue that point, what control do you have? Samuel gave these children a godly education, whether they wanted it or not. You're raised in a godly house, guess what? You're going to do it my way. It's my roof. I heard that growing up. Despise that roof talk. But I heard it. And even if he didn't say it, I saw it. The hope he had for them doing well for this people, for God's work, that was the hope of this father. Not that it would make them rich in the physical way, but the joy that come with the service to God. The joy that you get for doing something for God, for other people, for God's honor and glory, you cannot buy that kind of joy. Okay? When we do things for God with a right heart, it is joyful. This father, knowing how lonely this service was, Samuel knew full and well when he put his children into the temptations of this job and the loneliness of this job. He knew how hard it could be. He knew the toll it could take on the mind and heart. As a father to his two boys, or his two children, he'd hoped perhaps that at this point they had a reputation to God's people as the sons of Samuel, to continue being servants to God's people. Now we know that didn't happen by the verses we read. They were their father's assistants. And the pride of a godly parent is a godly child. That is the pride. Not that you did anything to deserve it. But Samuel's full aware of his children. As a child, you want to make your parents proud, right? I always tell people my children, and Reese particularly, because I've worked with him, was the best employee I ever had. Because he didn't care about the money. He just wanted me to be happy with him. And that as a child, that's how we should, as a child of God, we shouldn't be worried about the benefits of serving God. We just want that fellowship, right? As a child, you want to make your parents proud. My dad to this day still introduces me to strangers as his favorite son. I'm his only son. But you want to make, as they are looking to their father and as they go out, they are doing the Lord's work. but they are known as the sons of Samuel. We can look at our children, and I pray that we could say that God's shown us mercy. He's been good to us, and now we see them serving God, hopefully better than we have, right? That's our goal. As we are raising our children, everything that we do and say, the things that we allow into their lives, the things they see us doing, Lord willing, they're not making the same mistakes we've made, and they are taking something and doing it better than we did. That's our goal as a church for the generation coming up. Take this that God has given us and go to the next level with it, right? Go take it where God would have it. The point is God's getting the honor and glory. Really, if we break it down, my words don't mean anything. Who's getting honor and glory in it, right? Who's getting honor and glory in our homes? Who's getting honor and glory in my life? Because they're going to repeat what they see. Some believe if you study through this and you read a bunch of commentary, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, that Samuel really didn't want his children to have to bear this, that they were just there to help ease some of the burden off of an aging father. And I'm not 100% sure what his desires were. He did appoint them to a place. But would you want this for your children? I mean, we all know pastors' kids, right? And that's a hard life. You're under a microscope. And that's really the only thing we can compare this to. But service to the Lord, as far as a pastor or as Samuel, it's good and bad. It's joyful and hurtful. This service to the Lord is great when it's right. But it's a burden and it's convicting and it's a weight to carry at other times. Samuel's sons had all the same opportunities to serve God the way their father did, but they made it a business. They weren't about the father's business. Their actions would give an opening to other people. That's the problem here. In verse 3, we see the fear, I believe, of any godly parent out there when it says, and his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, took bribes, and perverted judgment. His sons walked not in his way, but turned aside after lucre. Lucre is money or profit, and this is for the flesh. It's unworthy gain of wealth caused by greed. They were living for earthly gain, right? Not for godly gain. Walked not in his ways, meaning they ignored the raising God had so graciously given them by their father and chased things of the world. I think that if we were all being honest, we'd all say we've done that at least once. We desire things that will burn up, things that when we're gone we can't take with us. We'll spend our whole life gaining, sometimes just to lose. This happens with us as God's people. And I was thinking of a friend I have who's a few years older than me, and he grew up, and I'm going to say this, and y'all can scold me later. He grew up a pastor's son, and they were poor. They didn't have anything. Their life was a service to the Lord. He grew up without anything. And when he became an adult, his life, instead of seeing the sacrifices and the gain that his poor family had for the Lord, he went the other way and just tried to gain constant to make up for not having anything growing up. We get it wrong. And it's easy to look around at what others have and say, man, I don't have it as good. And a lot of times it's who you compare yourself to. So if you want to look smart, compare yourself to a dumb person, right? You want to look poor, compare yourself to a rich person. You want to be real, compare yourself with this. This put us in our place. If you want to feel good about yourself, you usually compare yourself to somebody who's not as good at whatever the topic is, right? It's not easy growing up today, and it's not easy being a servant today. It's not as easy today to be God's people maybe as it was 10 years ago. Is that fair to say? that they're changing. They're going to get a little tighter. We can come to church free now, but it may cost us something in 5 or 10 years, right? Things are changing. We got to remember, though, that we're going to answer one day for our actions. No matter the environment, our requirement's the same. Serve God, do it His way according to His word. Whatever's going on around us, the environment doesn't change it. Our actions as His creation, as spouses, as parents, as children, as members of a church, will one day be judged. And when we're being judged, this book will come up and it say, this was your inspection. You knew the standard, you knew the rule, and you done this. You knew better, and yet you still done it. So in their decision to make this a business, they go from being Samuel's honor to his disgrace. Just because I have grace doesn't mean I can transfer it to my children's. I never forgot a conversation that Tyler and I had out here on the porch one day. He said he'd heard a sermon, or maybe he was preaching to me. But he said the speaker had said that just because you can handle something in your life or a particular sin doesn't mean your children can, and they're watching you deal with it every day. So say that was alcohol and you could handle one drink, your children may not be able to stop at one. That was the point of that. So that's grace. These decisions we're making, we have to understand that when we rub elbows with sin and we allow this little piece in our lives, our children may take that and make it a lot more than it really is, or what it should be, I mean. Our children are going to see it and think it's okay, and it could take over. Just because Samuel's intent was honest and good, even if his children had begun well and they're following in service, doesn't mean it's going to end well, right? Just because we start this race on a good pace doesn't mean we're going to end the race on a good pace. We've seen a lot of people burn out and fall off along the way. A lot of people start out for the right reasons, and then we turn an eye. We take our eye off what really matters, and we look around. And before we know it, maybe we're in lucre. We're doing it for part-time gain, we could say, instead of long-term glorification. The path, the start may be set out, it may be right. The parents, the onlookers have a great hope in what they see, but turning aside has caused grief where joy should have been. And I know I've done that to people in my life. It would seem in what we have read that his children were in Beersheba and out from under the eyes of their father. And perhaps this is where it started to go wrong. I don't know. I think that the seed had been planted there long before, and it just bloomed there. Maybe they had seen opportunity before this. But many of us are good in front of each other, right? We're good while we're at home under the watchful eyes of a parent. We're great Christians around other Christians. What about when you're the only Christian in a room of 50? What about when you get on your own and you have to stand alone? Things change. What's all this mean? We don't need to be secure in ourselves. We are in God's grace, and that's what keeps us. We need to pray the same thing on our children and our children's children and the future of this church and this nation. We can't let a job or a title change us. That's what happened here, or at least they took advantage of this job and title. We can't take pride in the things that God gives us. Your title is you're a child of the King. Your job is telling people that you're a child of the King, and your job is to tell people how that came about. You're to be about your Father's business. The perversion of judgment is what we're dealing with today in our country, right? This side blames this side and the other way around. And at this point, it's a blind, lost, dying world leading a blind, lost, dying world. Samuel's sons perverted right from wrong, and their vote was cast in favor of who bought them for the most money. You know, we can make We can make the same mistakes over and over again, but this time it's going to be different. We're smarter now than we used to be. We have more technology now, and the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The results don't change because the heart hasn't changed. If you got a study Bible, I don't have one here, but I was reading it at home. If you look at, I think, verse 3, it says that Samuel was busy like Eli with his ministry. Do you believe that? You believe that Samuel could blame God and his work for his children turning out the way they turned out? Samuel's ministry was God's. We say our ministry here. Our ministry is God's ministry. Our church is God's church. My life is God's life. Samuel's children watched him pray and serve God day in and day out. They watched him walk and travel to other places for God's work. And he lived what he preached. And his children saw that. I think it would be easier to say that his children failed him instead of him failing his children. You can't blame daddy. That's a big problem. I believe whoever wrote that he was too busy to raise his own children, that's an American way of thinking. Back in the day, you worked. You didn't have time to throw a ball or take your kid to the movie. You got up, you survived. Each day was survival. It ain't, daddy didn't throw a ball with me, daddy didn't do this. Daddy went to work. And you watch daddy pray, you watch daddy come home, hands bleeding, sore, calloused, scarred. He was too tired to talk at the time. That's a real dad. The fake dad is the one that the movies have made where we're going to go out. Hey, I'm not going to work this week. The government will take care. I'm getting preachy. We'll throw a ball. I don't have to go to work today. And there's nothing wrong with throwing a ball. Make time for your children. I loved throwing a ball with my dad growing up. But my dad worked. He taught me how to work. These children cannot blame their father for being busy about God's business. We got a blame daddy society for the last 20 or 30 years in our country, and that's a big problem. They had their own flesh to crucify every day. Quit trying to crucify your parents or your upbringing. You will answer for your life. You are a separate soul, a separate entity of your parents. I hated that when I read that. I almost threw that in the trash, that Bible. I hated that was in there. We are not going to blame God for being busy. If you are doing God's work, God will bless that. I have no doubt about it. And if he chooses to do it a different way, then it's for him. It ain't about me. The things that Samuel's children done gave an opportunity. It would cause a gathering, and some ideas came from this gathering that they wanted a king. And there were people, believe it or not, that used Samuel's son's failure to get what they really wanted all along. What does that sound like? It sounds a whole lot like dealing with a virus, right? We're going to use this to our advantage. There are people in wait for you to fall or for this or that to happen. Our adversary is real to take advantage of a moment. There's today's world, politicians are waiting for a virus, or, hey, he sneezed and he didn't have a mask on, crucify him. That's what we're dealing with. Samuel walked the life. His children came in. This happened, and we're not even going to get there. But next week we'll look at it. They see this. They got scared. They weren't thinking about God. They wanted a king. And probably they wanted a king all along because guess what? They were looking around at what everybody else was doing, what everybody else had. And they said, well, God's great, but we want a king. And it gave opportunity. We can't let our sins and our failures give opportunity. We don't get any second chances in life. You do it wrong once and it follows you forever. There's no erasing that. There's forgiveness, but there's no erasing it. I live with the decisions that I've made. While we're talking about decisions, this will be our last one. Joshua chapter 1, verse 7. Verse we all know very well. Joshua 1:7. I love the first chapter of Joshua. It's so encouraging. I just want to look at this. Again, this is a verse we all know, but I want us to think about some things that we just brought out through this verse. It says, only be thou strong. So this is what I require of you. Only be thou strong and very courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded thee. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that thou mayest prosper whithersoever thou goest. We all want to prosper, and God just told us how. Follow my law. This is a clash. What we're reading here is a clash to what we see in our world, to the raising that maybe we had, to the things that we see on TV, to the news feeds that pop up on our phone. This is button heads with it, right? Because it's different than what the world's teaching. God is saying, only be thou strong and courageous, that thou mayest observe to do according to the law. You got to be strong in the law. Be strong in the word. Have courage in the word, not in yourself. You watch movies, TV shows, you read books. The idea is touted before our face that whoever is strong will make their own way. Joshua didn't make his own way. God made it for him. Sometimes we're just not big enough to overcome the problem in front of us. That we have to do our own thing, that we aren't to bow down to authority. You know, you're a good teenager. You're going to be smart. You're going to go far if you stand up against your parents. You're a good employee. You're courageous if you defy your employer. They'll see. No, a godly employee says, you want it done that way? Fine. And then maybe I'll say, I don't agree with it, but I'll do it that way. I'm wrong. That's wrong, because God's not getting honor and glory. Then it becomes about me. See, decision making is more than we realize. Samuel's children made a decision, and it wasn't a godly one. God tells Joshua the way of true strength, true courage, great courage is the way of obedience and loyalty. He says, I've placed Moses over you. God says to Israel, I've placed Moses over, so you are to obey him and obey the law that he has given you. The more strong you are, the more obedient you will be. The more courageous you are, the less you will question my authority and veer from my commandments. Decision making under which, if you look at Samuel, when they made that decision, was it about God or them? Really, if we ask ourselves, should I take this job? Should I buy this? Should I leave here and go there? Is this about me and problems I have, or is this about God? Who's getting honor and glory in this decision? We make decision making hard. Well, I've prayed about it and I've read, I just haven't gotten clarity. Well, let's look at our heart and wonder why we are doing these things. Are we still trying to assert ourselves and get our own way, make our own path? In our careers, in our decisions that lie ahead. The only success is to look to God for direction. And we got it right here in the Word. I should have said it Wednesday night. I've never known a joy like I have when I'm walking hand in hand with my Savior. When that fellowship's good and I hadn't messed it up, when the decisions have been made for him because he convicted me to, not because I'm doing it on my own. I'm thankful for those moments because I strive for those experiences again. Lord willing, we'll study this some more moving forward. So pray for that. But I thank you for your attention. And Brother Tyler, or Brother Reese, I'm sorry, would you dismiss us?